Hi everyone. Continuing on with the Revolver project, I have another unknown to me song in front of me this morning, and well, the last two I guessed wrong. This isn't all about guessing. I really enjoyed those listening experiences, but since I got two wrong in a row, I'm kind of sitting on pins and needles this morning thinking, okay, how is this one going to go? And what am I going to discover? I promise I won't be too nervous about it. In fact, I'll probably just immerse myself in the music and wake up at the end and be like, oh, wait, I was supposed to guess? We'll find out. Let's listen. Okay. To my ears, that is the most far out, weird Beatles piece of music I have listened to date. I don't mean that it's that far out weird, but in the context, in the scheme of things, I get to this. Wow, they're doing something different here. It has a real avant-garde feel to it, and the very spare melody being sung and all the instrumental noise happening around it, and the screeching and the humming and the buzzing and the droning and the the very static feeling to the harmonic setup. It's all yeah, it's very different from what they've done in the past. Well, let's see. What was the last one I listened to? I Need You in My Life or something like that?
Got to get you into my life.
Got to get you into my life. Okay. I have a suspicion that this is maybe kind of on the same topic. I'm not sure because I was so busy listening to the musical sounds, I wasn't really following the lyrics. But there was something about float downstream and some other things. I'll check out the lyrics in a moment. All right. Well, I just fessed up. I didn't pay attention to the lyrics enough to know the title. Um, it has a strange combination of almost Indian bazaar sounding with voices and conversation and chatter happening in the instruments. At the same time, it's so static. It's like we're off at a distance, or maybe it's a more of a religious, meditative at a temple with a whole bunch of other people doing the same thing. It has some strange mix of sounds and feelings and ideas to my ears. But I do catch a very, shall I say, oriental flavor to it, which I think is intentionally so. Okay. So I completely lost my chance to guess the title, but the voice I'm quite certain is John Lennon. So Vlad gave me a thumbs up. I think I got it right this time. So let's read about it and then we'll listen again. 67th in our 150 series. The genre is psychedelic rock, experimental rock, raga rock. I would say all of those work. A song written by John Lennon. And the title is Tomorrow Never Knows. Okay, maybe I should just take a quick look at the lyrics here. Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Yes, I caught that much. It is not dying. It is not dying. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void. It is shining. It is shining. And one of the things that struck me about it is that it's such a noisy musical sound. And I'm supposed to turn off my mind, relax, and float downstream to that? To me, that doesn't work for me. But I understand what they're getting at, so it works. You may see the meaning of within, it is being, that love is all, and love is everyone. Of course it's Lennon. It is knowing that ignorance and haste may mourn the dead. It is believing, but listen to the color of your dreams. It is not living, or play the game existence to the end of the beginning. Of the beginning, of the beginning, of the beginning. Okay, this is Lennon really pushing things to the limits as far as how far can he go and still get away with it with his audience. That's my feeling. The song has a vocal put through a Leslie speaker cabinet, which was normally used as a loudspeaker for a Hammond organ, and uses automatic double tracking to double the vocal image. Tape loops prepared by the Beatles were mixed in and out of the Indian-inspired modal backing underpinned by Ringo Starr's constant but non-standard drum pattern. The song is also one of the first uses of a flanging effect on any instrument. The song is often considered one of the greatest songs of all time, with Pitchfork Media placing it at number 19 on its list of the 200 greatest songs of the 1960s, and it being featured in Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. That doesn't surprise me. Because I'm going to use the term weird as it is, as strange as it is, it works incredibly well. It manages to be musically compelling, convincing, in its own right, on its own 2 feet, even though it doesn't really fit anything that I've heard to date. It doesn't fit any of those categories quite like this. Probably never before in pop music history could a 5-month break result in such a flagrant new direction as did the unveiling of what became Tomorrow Never Knows. The inspiration for the song came from a book entitled The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Yes, I kind of had this vision of Tibetan monks and the prayer flags and the prayer wheels and all the other stuff and the noise and the squeaks and the screeches of the, well, let's see, I guess they're the ones that have the singing bowls. Am I right? I think they have the singing bowls too. I'm getting all these different religious traditions mixed up in my mind. But it has that sort of somehow noisy, but at the same time religious meditative quality to it. Paul relinquishes any doubt as to who was the entire composer of this track by saying, "The final track on Revolver, Tomorrow Never Knows, was definitely John's." While Paul never contested that Tomorrow Never Knows was a full John Lennon composition, his input was extremely instrumental in creating the psychedelic landscape that finished off the Revolver listening experience. Thus became another example of the brilliant Lennon-McCartney partnership, one that will never be equaled. Have to say so. So this was the last one on the album? Okay, so we've kind of been building up to it to this point. What a send-off! This is... We've listened to all kinds of stuff in this album, and then we get sent off with this... It kind of works as a sort of encore piece, doesn't it? The Void was apparently a little too deep of a title for the song, so John looked elsewhere to name his masterpiece. "I took one of Ringo's malapropisms as the title," he explains, "to take the edge off the heavy philosophical lyrics. I remember the mention of Ringo's, what was that? 8 days? No, it wasn't 8 days a week. What was it?
A Hard Day's Night.
A Hard Day's Night. That's it. Seems that he had a unique contribution to the band. Aside from his drumming. George Harrison explains, "Ringo would always say grammatically incorrect phrases, and we'd all laugh." Ringo admits, "I used to, while I was saying one thing, have another thing come into my brain and move down fast. Tomorrow Never Knows was something I said. God knows where it came from. John used to like them most. He always used to write them down. I seem to be better now." I guess we've all had moments like that. I know I have, especially when I'm teaching. I'm teaching a student. Well, actually, I have this... I don't do it so much now because technology has changed the way I do things in my studio a bit. But I used to have this little notepad. Each student would have their very own lesson notebook, and I would make lesson notes for them to go home and practice with during the lesson. And because I didn't want them to sit there and be bored while I'm writing, I would be talking and listening, and we would be interacting in the teacher-student dynamic while I'm jotting down lesson notes. Sometimes strange things would come out of my mouth because my pen can't keep up with my mouth, and my brain is already thinking, 5 miles ahead of where we are. So it's like I'm working in 3 different time zones at once. And then what's really shocking, since I'm on this topic, I'll just digress a little further, is when a student would come back with the lesson notes the next day, and I would look at what I had written, and it made absolutely no sense, because maybe I started a thought and then finished it when we were, talking, continuing the conversation, but my pen just went into some other part of the conversation, and I would look at it and say, "So tell me what you practiced here." And they would give me this blank stare, and then I would know that they never even cracked their book open, or they would have seen that nonsensical line. So all that is to say, Ringo, you have my sympathies. I understand on some level. And I suppose we all have those moments in our lives. So it's great to see that those moments can be such beautiful contributions to something like the Beatles' music. An interview by David Coleman of BBC Television on February 22nd, 1964, does well in shedding some light on when Ringo used the phrase. When asked to relate the circumstances at the embassy ball at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., where someone reportedly snipped off some of his hair with a pair of scissors, Ringo responded, "I was just talking, having an interview, and I looked round and there were about 400 people just smiling. So, what can you say?" John, what can you say? Ringo, tomorrow never knows. Very good. All right. Well, that's a nice bit of background. Let's go through and listen and see what we discover a second time round. Okay, so this introduction, when I listened to it, I immediately remembered that I just recently talked about how I haven't heard a fade in for a while. And now it feels like suddenly I've heard one and now another one. And now understanding that this is the last song on the album, I'm even thinking, well, I don't know in what order these were recorded for the album, but the placement on the album is so perfect for this one. And it feels like, in a way, they've kind of pulled out all the stops. They've put all kinds of stuff in this song that were sprinkled here, there. One song featured this, one song featured this, a bit of this. The sitar showed up. Well, suddenly we have a fade in with sitar. At least that's what it sounds like to me. And then everything else comes in. We have this kind of interesting rhythm showing up at the drums. And then, what is all this stuff happening? At first, it sounds like human chatter, but I'm not convinced that it is meant to be that. Maybe, I don't know, birds or something like that. And out of all this chatter and noise comes this voice, "Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream." If I read the notes, yep, something like that. Relax and float downstream. And all of this stuff happening. Is it human voices? Is it birds? Is it sounds of nature? Is it sounds of civilization? Is it, is it the sort of turning prayer wheels and prayer flags flapping in the breeze? Is it, what is all this stuff? And I'm not sure, I don't think that we're really supposed to identify a specific thing that it represents. It's more like this, as I said, it feels incredibly avant-garde. When I say avant-garde, I mean in terms of the avant-garde, really modern 20th century classical music experimentations that composers are doing in the classical world with serialism and atonalism and strange sounds, bringing it all into the classical aesthetic and figuring out what to do with it. It almost feels like that sort of thing is happening here. But as I'm paying attention to the lyrics, okay, let me come back to a thought that I had the first time around. When I said, it kind of reminds me of I need you in, what is it? I need you in my life. Oh, I want to have you in my life. What is that?
Got to get you in.
Got to get you in. I remember the general gist of it, but got to get you into my life. So, something about this makes me think that it's influenced by that sort of psychedelic experience. And that's why, I don't know, psychedelic rock fits the description quite well to my mind. It's an experience I've never had. I don't ever intend to have it at this point in my life. But something about it just makes me think that it is closely linked to their experimentations with drugs and other substances. I don't know enough about it to say specifically, but I also understand that they were getting more into the Indian sound world at this time too, and that comes out loud and clear too. So we have this meditative kind of religious quality. We have this what sounds to me like psychedelic experience quality, and I'm going to lay that psychedelic experience to the side simply because I don't know enough to comment on it. Although I'm saying up front that I hear that I feel and I hear that it exists in this song, but that's as far as I'm going to go with that. I'm not qualified to speak any more about it. But let's talk about this other element, which comes out as I read the lyrics. Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. It is not dying, it is not dying. And my first response was, how could I relax with this kind of noise happening? It feels so chaotic, and as I'm coming around the second time to listen, it feels as if the voice is the call to that sort of clearing of the mind, meditative experience against the backdrop of the noise of life. That's what comes to me out of this first little bit here. We have the noise of life, the chatter, the activity, all the efforts and things happening, and then we have this calm, peaceful, easy voice inviting and saying, turn off your mind, relax, float downstream, leave that all behind, leave it all, but just don't let it bother you. Enter into this space of mindful mindlessness. And that's how the second time around I'm beginning to make sense of what the music is doing, what the voice is calling for, and all of that comes together. It is not dying. Right? And then suddenly, another thing is coming in. So that's how the music impacts me when I listen. And I start following different parts of it. Okay, the drums are kind of a steady, stabilizing effect. And there's really quite a bit of percussive activity in here. Bum da dum bum bum ba da dum da, and then the little tiki 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 tiki, everything happening, which creates a sort of texture and maybe a track on which we travel, even if everything around us sounds so confusing and chaotic. But it's a strange sort of chaos, meaning even though it sounds so noisy and busy and disorienting and disorganized, there's also an incredibly, well, I said earlier, static quality, a very calming element about it, which is not so much about the texture and the timbre of the instruments, but more about the harmonic base of the piece, which is essentially a drone on C. That's our foundation for everything. And well, as we're looking at the melody, what a beautifully spare melody this is. So incredibly simple. This first half here, it starts on E. Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It's essentially a C chord. It's all built around a triad, a simple C major triad. And the only note in the melody that ever does anything other than that is this B flat that shows up here. It is not dying, undying, or shining, being, knowing. That's the only place that we have anything that is not a straight triad. And that is your B flat. It is not dying. That's it. Well, then we have to say, is that a change of harmony? Is that a harmonic shift in the music? Or is it simply more of a kind of dominant 7 quality to it? Or we could say a flat 7 if this is the root. That's there. But it's not really a piece that works to analyze it in the traditional Western harmonic, functional harmony tradition. But it's nice to notice these elements of a simple triad, a flat 7 added. That's it. And as I'm listening to this, I went back up because that's all the melody we have. And in fact, I'm not sure we'd even call this verses. It's more like a mantra that's sung multiple times. But it is a lovely little melody with a beautiful simplicity about it. And as we go forward, I want to point out a few things as we listen to the next part of it. This moment here recalled to my mind Waiting for the Worms. The sort of buzzing, humming quality in the music, and the it's almost like flies buzzing around, isn't it? So when we get this da da bum ba dum, and we listen to the flat 7, this knowing, dying, shining, whatever syllable we have. As we listen to that, and here as I'm listening, do we experience it as a different harmony, as a shift in the harmonies, or do we experience it as a continuation and perhaps a leaning into a little more color within this drone that's happening? And I would go for the second description. I don't feel it as a harmonic shift so much as a coloration, a warming up of the color, because this triad is really quite bright. Especially with Lennon's voice. And what did it say? He's singing through some speaker cabinet, Leslie speaker cabinet. I can hear it's kind of made even more thin and strident that way. I guess that's an interesting question to think about with this sonic experience. Is it a falling apart and disintegration of the somehow held together sonic experience? Or as it starts to unravel at the end, is it less a falling apart and more of a clarifying and being able to pick out specific strands musically? I guess a lot would depend on personal experience. The first time I went through, I thought, oh, it's just falling apart at the end. Now coming through the second time, I feel like that's kind of cool. We've had all this stuff happening, which is hard to parse and say because it fades in a little bit here, a little bit there, these kind of loops of sound, I might say, because it's not always specific pitches, and they're layered or they sequence after each other, and at the end it feels like the second time around I could start to identify single strands of it a little bit, and in terms of what's happening in the lyrics and what is being communicated through this piece of music, that is a question which can really shift our perspective of the piece depending on which answer we choose, doesn't it? And as I said, I think it's personal and perhaps specific to the moment, which is kind of cool. Well, as I said, it has some incredibly textural elements, and they all wash together, sweep in and out. I don't know exactly how they created all of these. I'm looking at my score here at the beginning. We have vocals, we have others. At the beginning it says sitar. We have keyboard, we have guitar. Guitar says reverse. We have bass, we have drums. Now, I remember in a previous piece of music, some of you told me that a specific sound was made by playing the guitar backwards, playing the guitar recording backwards. And so I suspect that this guitar reverse has a bit to do with that. And it kind of sounds in parts of the music like it is happening in reverse. But I don't know how they came up with everything. I think strings had a big part to play. Violins, you can do all sorts of screechy, squeaky business with those things. And other stuff, I don't know. But it ended up working surprisingly well. When you have a piece that has this much complexity and busyness and texture and this wide range, pitch-wise, all of this happening, I don't think this would have worked. Coming back to the melody, I don't think this piece would have had near the effect it had if it were not for the sake of that beautifully simple melody that is being sung. You have to have something to provide a pathway through the noise. And in this case, it's the melody, it's the voice. And John's voice does a beautiful job of it. It's his edgy quality to his voice works really well with all of these kind of intense musical instrumental sounds in the background, but at the same time, it traces a very fine line. It's like a sharp pointed pencil drawing a fine line through a maze. And you suddenly begin to find that there is a way through all of this. And that is what the voice is and the melody is leading us through. Really works incredibly well. Well, I have to say one more thing about this, which I have not even mentioned yet, but it has been sitting in my mind, and that is, well, George Harrison's piece,
I want to tell you.
I Want to Tell You. I mentioned how much that reminded me of Strawberry Fields Forever. This one also has an incredible amount of similarity to what goes on in Strawberry Fields Forever. Both of those from a different angle. This one, obviously, Strawberry Fields Forever has a different timbre, a different sonic quality. But it's this easy, peaceful glide and not really driven any specific direction. And the wonderful layering of complexity behind the voice that comes out. Of course, there are the slow triplets. There are other things about it too, technically. But just listening to it overall, even though it sounds so heavily influenced by Indian music and philosophy, it also kind of lets me know that it's not just George Harrison that's tending in this direction. Although he's the sitar player, right? Am I right? Yeah, he's the sitar player. But also John Lennon, the whole Beatles group probably, is exploring this and moving in a direction that would eventually take them to something like Strawberry Fields Forever. This was a fun experience. Completely different. I can't imagine, as I'm thinking of album order and my whole experience going through this album, I can't imagine listening to this piece anywhere else in the album and having it fit comfortably. It feels like the perfect send-off, the perfect coda, the perfect send-off. That's what I want to say. We've taken you through this whole journey. You've heard bits and pieces of this and that and the other thing. Now here, we basically threw the whole kitchen sink at this. And it happened to work beautifully. And then you can decide yourself if at the end the world is descending into chaos, or if we are finally beginning to unravel some of the mysterious strands of it. I'll see you soon for whatever comes next.